Good afternoon, and welcome to the Federal Railroad Administration's Fiscal Year 2021 Consolidated Rail Infrastructure and Safety Improvements Grant Program Notice of Funding Opportunity webinar. Before we begin, I would like to take you through the items you see on your screen. The top left window of the screen is where the PowerPoint presentation is being displayed. If you are having issues viewing the presentation slides after the webinar begins, ensure first that you are not using the Microsoft Edge browser. If using another browser, exit the webinar and either reload your browser and re-enter the webinar, or re-enter the webinar through the Adobe Connect desktop application. If you are hearing it sounding like people are speaking over each other, make sure that you have not joined the room twice. At the bottom left of your screen in the Troubleshooting Tips pod are some internet, network, video, and audio troubleshooting steps to ensure that participants can both hear and see the presentation. Next to the Troubleshooting pod is the Web Links pod. To view the web links, double-click the title of the link. On the bottom right is the Technical Support chat pod. This is where you can ask our technical team questions about any technical issues you are having. Above the Web Links pod is the Q&A session questions pod. This is where you can ask questions that will be answered during the question and answer portion of today's presentation. Thanks to all of you who submitted pre-webinar questions. If your questions are not directly addressed in the webinar content, we will answer them in the Q&A session at the end of the webinar as time allows. We will also be conducting polls during the webinar. Please ensure that you are not viewing the presentation in full screen mode so that you can participate in the polls. Please note that webinar presentation materials and a video recording will be uploaded to FRA's website in the next week. Before the presentation begins, I'd like to go over the webinar format. We'll start off with a brief welcome, ask a couple of polling questions, and then have a few introductory remarks from FRA's Deputy Administrator, Amit Bose, before we launch into the presentation. We will ask additional poll questions in the middle and toward the end of the webinar. Following the presentation portion of the webinar, we will have a question and answer session where FRA will address your questions posted in the Q&A session questions pod. Today's presenters are Doug Gascon, Acting Chief, Program and Policy Development Division, Office of Railroad Policy and Development, Matt Laura, Supervisory Grants Management Specialist, Grants and Program Management Division, Office of Railroad Policy and Development, Judah Lineman, Transportation Analyst, Freight Rail Policy Division, Office of Railroad Policy and Development. And Andrea Martin, Senior Environmental Protection Specialist, Infrastructure Investment Division, Office of Railroad Policy and Development. At this time, we have our very first polling questions. Our first question is, what type of organization do you represent? State, interstate compact, public agency or publicly chartered authority, local government, Amtrak, industry or consultant, other, or universities. And to make a selection, please click the little circle there next to the answer. All right, thank you all so much. We're going to go ahead and end this poll. It looks like we have about 19% coming from the state to include DC. We have about 15% today who've joined us from the public agency or publicly chartered authority. Looks like we've got 15% from the local government, 2% from Amtrak, 33% coming from the industry or consultant, and 14% coming from other, and 3% coming from universities. Our next polling question is, have you participated in any previous discretionary grant program webinars? Yes, I have participated in a live webinar. Yes, I've watched a recorded webinar online. Or no, I have not previously attended or watched any webinars. All right. It looks like we've got 50% who have participated in a live webinar, 11% who have watched a recorded webinar, and 39% who have not attended or watched any webinars in the past. So we say welcome back to those who have participated in a live webinar, and welcome to those who have not or who have only watched one online. I will now turn today's presentation over to FRA's Deputy Administrator Bose, who will make a few opening remarks.
Hi, everyone. Great to be with you today. I know in seeing the list of folks who've registered for this, I saw an overwhelming number of you, and it just points to the exciting time it is for rail in the United States. And thank you for joining us today. For the Federal Railroad Administration, the Consolidated Railroad Infrastructure and Safety Improvement Program is an important one. Since the FAST Act, FRA has delivered a number of projects through this program, and the representation on this call by your attendance shows the continued interest that we have in this program. And we thank you for your support and your interest in it. We're excited to share the FY21 CRISI Notice of Funding opportunity with you all and look forward to collecting and reviewing all project applications. The information presented here today is designed to provide you all the information needed to ensure that your applications are competitive so that we can have the best possible range of applications to choose from. I know you all are excited to learn more about the CRISI process, so without further delay, let's jump to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Administrator Bose. We'll now turn the presentation over to Doug Gascon.
Hi, everyone. My name is Doug Gascon. I'm the Acting Chief of the Program and Policy Development Division here at FRA in the Office of Railroad Policy Development. Here is a quick look at the agenda. I will give the quick overview of the program itself. We will also go through a couple different sections here, sort of how to apply, some best practices that we've identified from several rounds of this now, as well as some recaps and reminders to make your applications competitive, and then we'll end with a Q&A. Thank you. I see a lot of questions are coming in through the chat. We will try to answer as many of them as we can, if they aren't answered by the webinar itself. So moving on, just to a quick program overview. Just want to thank you all again for your interest in the CRISI program and for taking the time to participate in today's webinar. Again, just a quick overview of the program requirements. You have a sense of what it is, what types of projects are eligible, and how best to write your application to make it competitive. So really quickly here on this overview, the purpose of the program is to fund projects that improve the safety, efficiency, and or reliability of intercity passenger freight rail systems. We've included information here of the authorization and appropriation levels of the CRISI program since fiscal year 2018. As you can see, we've been funded at or above its authorized levels. This shows strong support from the Congress on the need for federal funding to improve the safety and reliability of our nation's rail network. For fiscal year 21, this is the round we're currently talking about, there is about 362 million available in this notice. About 360 million of that is for CRISI, and 2.3 million in non-CRISI funding is for the implementation of trespass safety programs. I'll get into the distinctions there in a little bit. If past is prologue, we will expect awards to be announced sometime in the spring of 2022. In terms of eligible applicants, these are the same as previous rounds: states, local governments, public agencies, intercity passenger rail carriers, class 2 and 3 railroads, universities, etc. For public law enforcement agencies seeking the non-CRISI trespass enforcement funding, you're eligible under the local government or public agency eligibility for those funds. If you don't see your organization covered by one of these eligibilities, you're potentially ineligible as an applicant. It doesn't mean you cannot be involved in a project as a partner. I want to note, we get questions on this, that tribes are not currently eligible under CRISI. We have seen some changes proposed in the Congress, but at current law, tribes are not directly eligible. But again, we allow project partners, encourage project partners throughout the CRISI program. So if you have specific questions about your eligibility, please reach out after the webinar, and we can provide a little more guidance based on your situation. Eligible project criteria. So CRISI is, the CRISI program is the big tent at FRA. It funds a wide variety of intercity and freight rail projects. Almost any capital project to improve or expand rail infrastructure, deployment of railroad safety technology, improvements to existing highway rail grade crossings, regional or corridor service planning. Non-construction purposes are research, workforce development and training, development of safety programs and institutes. We get a lot of questions, so I want to note a couple activities that are not eligible under CRISI. Project-specific planning. So only corridor planning is eligible. Planning for one component project of a larger corridor, say a station or a port improvement, for example, would not be eligible for planning under CRISI. Commuter rail passenger transportation. Except for the deployment of positive train control systems, commuter rail passenger projects are not eligible under CRISI. And for grade crossing projects, I want to note that the project must improve an existing highway rail grade crossing. Projects that create or build a road, create a new crossing, or build a road over rail where there's no current crossing are not eligible in CRISI. And I want to note here that at least 25% of the funds, the CRISI funds, are reserved for rural projects. We have some set-asides in the CRISI program. Again, there's the 25% minimum for rural projects. Rural area is defined to mean any area not in an urbanized area as defined by the Census Bureau. In the NOFO, we provide the link there to where you can find sort of the updated list of urbanized areas. So the Census Bureau defines the urbanized area as an area with a population of 50,000 or more people. So that's the threshold for the rural or non-rural divide. There's $75 million set aside in this NOFO specifically for capital projects that support the new intercity passenger rail service routes, including the alignments for existing routes. There's $25 million in CRISI for capital projects and engineering solutions targeting trespassing, which is a new set aside. We haven't seen this before in Congress, from the Congress. And we are also, as I mentioned earlier, rolling in some non-CRISI funding to sort of tack on this new momentum on targeting the issue of trespassing. So this is $2.3 million. It is in non-CRISI funding. And so this has been incorporated in NOFO for ease. And these are for the Railroad Trespassing Enforcement Program or the Railroad Trespassing Suicide Prevention Outreach Program, which have been standalone grant programs in recent years. For now, we are rolling them into this NOFO as well. I want to note that applicants seeking the non-CRISI funding look for the Track 4 requirements in the NOFO. That will sort of help guide your application process. A little more detail here on the specific trespassing set-asides. Again, this $25 million in CRISI funding for capital projects and engineering solutions targeting trespassing. There is a selection preference for these projects located in counties with the most pedestrian casualties as identified in FRA's national strategy to prevent trespassing. So we provided the link here. It's also on our website. In terms of the non-CRISI funding, these are two programs that have been rolled into this NOFO for expediency. And so enforcement, the Railroad Trespassing Enforcement Grant Program, there's just over $2 million for this. This is for railroad trespass enforcement activities at hotspots on FRA regulated track. That's an important distinction. These awards are limited to hourly wages for law enforcement officials, and there's a maximum award of $120,000. For the Railroad Trespass and Suicide Prevention Grant Program, there's $207,000 available. This is for the implementation or expansion of targeted outreach campaigns to reduce railroad-related suicides. I want to note that these funds are directed towards improving existing programs, not for the development of new ones. This must also be on FRA regulated track. And the max award here is $100,000. Important note that the applicants must be eligible for CRISI to seek those funds. But it's important that the federal share of these projects can be up to 100%. There is no required non-federal match for the non-CRISI funding. So if you're interested in either the trespass enforcement, if you're a public law enforcement agency, or the suicide prevention grant program, there is no required match for those. And again, look for the track 4 submission requirements in the NOFO to help guide your application. In terms of the non-federal match requirements, CRISI funds require a minimum non-federal match of 20%. So the federal share can max out at 80. We really we want you to clearly identify the funding source as well as amounts that each partner is contributing, if applicable. In-kind contributions are allowed, but must be compliant with 2 CFR Part 200, and we have links to those in the NOFO as well. Important note that any funds already expended or expected to be expended prior to award are not eligible. We will not allow those to be eligible costs, and they shouldn't be reflected in the total project cost in your application. For in-kind contributions, they are allowed. There is some rules required for those, and we provide that again in 2 CFR 200. And just a note here, historically, the average non-federal match for the CRISI program is about 49%. That's actually what it was last year, and that's the life of the program. So that is where the previous rounds selection has averaged out to about 49% of a non-federal match. In terms of the evaluation selection criteria, these are statutory. FRA will evaluate each application for the degree to which it meets each criteria. So, the tasks and subtasks of the statement of work are appropriate to achieve expected outcomes. Applications include strong project readiness, technical qualifications, and capacity of the applicant to carry out this project, for example, as well as consistency with planning documents. Has this been a project in development for some time, or does it maybe need a little more seasoning? Same with project benefits. We want to look at the effect on system performance and safety, how it integrates with other modes. Is there a need for, is demand there, whether that's a freight need or a passenger rail need? Is it able to meet that demand? In selection criteria, these are statutory as well. The federal share is 50% or less. That is a statutory preference. That is not a requirement, it is a preference, as well as projects that sort of maximize net benefits over the life of the project. In terms of, there's some specific selection preferences for some of these set-asides in the NOFO. So for the intercity passenger rail, the new routes there, the 75 million, there's a preference for the pre-construction elements that would support the development of new intercity passenger rail routes. And with the CRISI trespass funding there, as well as trespass enforcement activities, there is a preference for areas with documented casualties. So again, we want to make sure that you guys are aware of those preferences that are not requirements, but they're preferences built into the program. So as your application, if applicable, we want you to make sure that you're aware of those. Please carefully read the evaluation and selection criteria section of the NOFO and make sure you address each one clearly and directly. And last but not least, for sure, are the DOT, the key departmental objectives here. The Biden-Harris administration has identified 5 key DOT objectives that the CRISI program can help achieve. We will assess each project's ability to meet one or more of these objectives, if applicable. We've broken them down into these big categories. There's safety. Again, we're looking at the extent to which an application improves safety at highway rail grade crossings, reduces incidents of trespass, and just achieves a greater level of safety on rail infrastructure or service, equitable economic strength, or improving core assets. How much, to the extent to which your application invests in vital infrastructure, capital needs that connects farms, factories, shippers to the rail network. Maybe there's no connections existing for rail at the moment. And also building a sort of increasing more opportunities for folks through the rail industry employment. Is resilience or addressing climate change, again, to the extent to which a projects reduce emissions, promote energy efficiency and resiliency, recycle or redevelop existing infrastructure. Racial equity and economic inclusion, to what extent these projects improve or expand transportation options or mitigate the safety risks or detrimental quality of life, effects that rail lines can have on communities, and also workforce development and training to achieve a more diverse rail industry. And transformational projects. So to the extent to which these are adding capacity to congested corridors or building new connections, ensures assets will be improved to a state of good repair. So again, as same with the criteria, the evaluation selection criteria, we also want your applications to speak to how they meet one or more of these objectives. And now I will hand this one off to Matthew Laura to give you an overview of the NOFO and how to apply.
Thanks, Doug. As Doug said, my name is Matthew Laura. I'm the acting chief of the Grants and Program Management Division at FRA. So we'll just talk a little bit about what is a NOFO, what should you expect to find in it, and how do you move forward with, after reading the NOFO and deciding you want to apply, how do you get that application into FRA? So first off, a NOFO is a Notice of Funding Opportunity, which is the formal announcement of the availability of federal funding through a financial assistance or grant program. It's generally found on the Federal Register and grants.gov. We also post them on our website. We'll show you where to find all that. But it really is the written version of everything you're hearing from us today. It details, the intent of the program, how to apply, who's eligible. Everything you're hearing from us today, you will be able to read and see in writing in the NOFO. The NOFO is a generally standard document for federal grant programs. So the major categories and the layout of it should be the same as you would see in any other federal grant program if you've read or seen other NOFOs. So in addition to simple things like dates, key due dates, contact information, you'll also see a description of the program, who is eligible, how and when to apply, etc. So a lot of the stuff you're hearing from us today in written format. Where do I start to go find the NOFO if you've not seen it already? So it has been posted and available since August 29th. And as I said, you can find it on the Federal Register. It was posted out there on August 29th. It is available through grants.gov, but we will recommend that you go and access the NOFO through FRA's Grants and Loans website with the link here. And this will also be posted on our website. Just Google FRA grants and it's generally the first option that comes up. So once you get to the Grants and Loans website, if you go to the competitive discretionary grant programs, any programs that are open and currently accepting applications are defaulted to the top. Legacy or closed grant programs that are not actively accepting applications will be found below on that page. So here you would just click the link to access the CRISI NOFO. And sorry, there's a page in between where it provides a little more information and detail on the program, and then has a further link to the NOFO itself. When you get into the NOFO, if you look at the PDF version, it's about 15 pages. So it's not overly burdensome to go through. A couple of key points is you want to make sure in trying to find it, you need to know the assistance listing, or what used to be known as the CFDA number. Highlighted on this page, if it's not a little hard to see, it is 2020.325. And you'll see that on sequential screens as well. Also of note, the application due date is 5 p.m. Eastern Time, Monday, November 29th. Please note this is the Monday after Thanksgiving. So it is very likely Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday leading up to this deadline, it will be difficult to get access to someone to assist, whether it be a technical issue with grants.gov or an eligibility type program question for FRA. This is Monday after Thanksgiving. I would highly recommend, if possible, you get your applications in prior to Thanksgiving to avoid that holiday time where it may be harder to get questions answered. But the deadline in grants.gov, we will not accept applications that are submitted after 5 p.m. Eastern on Monday, November 29th. There's very little leeway in this. So if it is a specific issue with your working through grants.gov or getting your application together, you're probably not going to get an extension there. Okay, so you've found the NOFO through our website. You've read the 15 pages. Sorry, before we get into how do you actually apply, we're going to run another poll question for you guys.
All right. Our next polling question is, have you experienced using grants.gov? Yes, extensive. B, yes, limited. Or C, no experience. And again, you can just make that selection by the little dot there next to the answer. All right. We're going to go ahead and end this poll. Looks like we've got 16% with yes extensive, 42 yes limited, and 42 with no experience.
Okay, so we have a fair amount of folks that do not have previous experience with grants.gov. So very simply, it is a one-stop shop for federal grant applications. All discretionary competitive grant programs across government should be using grants.gov. So not only would you be using it to apply for this FY21 CRISI announcement, you would be able to also search for other rail, transportation, or federal grant opportunities. When you get into the system, from the home screen, you'll always want to just click. You can see it highlighted in the brighter blue versus the dark blue, search grants. And there is various criteria that you can search by. The easiest is knowing that CFDA or assistance listing number. If you were to put in 20.325 and hit search, this would be the only announcement that would populate. There's other ways to get there by searching departments and going to transportation, FRA, etc. But the quickest and easiest is knowing your assistance listing or CFDA number 20.325. So as you search and find your opportunity, you'll see your posted date, August 31st. I think I said the 29th earlier, sorry, August 31st, and your close date of November 29th. Otherwise, you'll just want to click on the opportunity number to get further into grants.gov. So the opportunity is broken out into 4 tabs. Synopsis is the one that really has your high level information, how much is available, again, your due dates, your title, etc. Version history, probably not much need for you guys to get into that tab. Related documents, again, has a PDF version of the NOFO for you, so you can see it again there if you don't have it through our website or the Federal Register. And package is where you can download the or work through the grants.gov workspace, which is the application package. So you can access the ability to apply through either the red apply button that you see on the top right or the blue package tab kind of more in the middle of the screen. That would be the two ways you get into your grants.gov workspace. Of note, before you get ready and log into grants.gov to apply, a couple prerequisites that you guys need to meet that can take some time. First and foremost, you need to obtain a Duns and Bradstreet number, commonly referred to as a DUNS number in the federal grant community. If you have not done so, it is required to do business with the federal government, whether that is accepting financial assistance through grants and cooperative agreements, or even being a contractor to the federal government. A DUNS number is required. You need to, once you receive a DUNS number, you need to register on www.sam.gov. That is the System for Award Management. Again, you need to be registered in SAM to do business with the federal government. That can take 2 or even up to 3 weeks when it gets to be a busy season for SAM. So if you're thinking about applying, I would recommend you go out and start the DUNS and SAM process now. Don't wait until you're ready to apply. Don't wait until even into November. If SAM gets backed up and you don't have a DUNS and you don't have a SAM registration, that is not reason for us to extend these announcement or solicitation. It is on the applicants to get these 2 items in order, and it can take some time. So start the process now if you're interested in applying, which we hope you all are, and that's why you're here today. Then third most, once you get a DUNS and a DUNS number and a SAM registration, you'll want to complete an AOR profile in grants.gov. And that is your authorized organization representative. That is the person who has authority for your organization to submit an application to the federal government. So those are the 3 prerequisites that would allow you to then get into grants.gov to apply. So again, start the process now if you're interested. It's better to have them available to you. The DUNS number is one time and done. SAM registration is an annual renewal. So even if you're not going to apply to this particular announcement, the FY21 CRISI NOFO, and you're thinking about even applying for other programs or a future round of CRISI, it's good to just have these things underhand already. So once you have those 3 things, then we can actually get into submitting the application. So kind of the process, we're gonna go through several of the steps here. Is on FRA's website, we lay this out and we broke it down into these 4 phases. What I just talked about was the phase 1, which you can see there in yellow, orangish. The prerequisites that you need to complete before you even get into grants.gov to apply. The second phase there in the darker blue is what we're going to talk about now, which is putting together an application and submitting it through grants.gov. And then the green and blue are more the assessment of applications and award of grants. So what do I need to include in my application once I have read the complete NOFO, set up my registration in SAM and grants.gov, and I'm ready to apply? We broke this down into 2 screens. The first of which I'll say is where you would definitely want to go through the FRA website again. The project narrative, scope of work, environmental compliance documentation, and benefit cost analysis are not standard government forms. So you'll want to go into the FRA grants website and look at the tools and templates that we have available to you in putting these documents together. We're going to talk a bit about some of these, still on the back end of this presentation, but we have tools and templates available on our website as well. We have some more standard OMB required forms, which is your SF424, which is your technical application for federal assistance, as well as, if it's construction or non-construction, you can take the applicable forms, the SF424A and SF424C, or B and D. We have a document called the FRA's Additional Assurances and Certifications, an FRA Form 30. It is also available on grants.gov in the tab for additional documentation. And the SFLLL is to disclose lobbying activities if that is applicable for your organization. So SFLLL is not required for all grantees, only if you perform lobbying activities. you would need to submit that form. So that talks a bit about your forms that are going to be required for regardless of which track you're applying under the CRISI program for the most part. Here, if you want additional information, the grants.gov customer support link is more technical issues. If you cannot get documents to upload into grants.gov, your submit button is not working, you're going to want to contact grants.gov for more technical, I can't get the system to work. If you have questions on eligibility and how do I write a project narrative, those are going to have to come to FRA. You can use the link to additional information there, and you're going to want to talk to FRA directly. We can tell you what should be included if you're eligible, if your project is eligible. Getting those items uploaded into the system is going to require grants.gov technical support. And then lastly, just so you guys are aware, we oftentimes will get the question, we'll submit an application and immediately or within the first couple of weeks start getting questions on, what do we hear, when do we hear it? So the process is, we get the applications by 5 p.m. on November 29th. We immediately have to start what we call intake and eligibility, and that is the simple process of, was it submitted on time? Does it have all the required documents as outlined in the NOFO from an eligible entity for an eligible project? Once we've weeded out and only move forward with those eligible entities and projects, we get into the evaluation panels with subject matter experts from FRA and across DOT. And that is to make sure that we are funding the best projects that were eligible for the program. As selections are made in 3 there, we'll get to an announcement where we will put out a press release. As Doug said, expect that to be sometime in spring 22 if the timeline from previous rounds holds true. So, you're not going to apply in November and get something by Christmas here. It's going to be probably, sometime in the spring that we'll make announcements, and then we will start the process of moving those selected applications forward to obligate a grant. So we do have some slides here that we can talk about the best practices for putting together the best application for your project. And I'm going to turn it back over to Doug Gascon to walk you guys through our best practices.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Matthew. Yeah, I'm going to just go through some best practices that we've seen over the years and some helpful hints here that will really help you, help frame your. I'm getting some feedback here. I'm not sure if everyone else is. Okay, thank you. So the biggest helpful hint we have for you is read the notice of funding opportunity completely and carefully. Read it several times. A lot of the questions, a lot of information we have here are answered in the notice. Sometimes it's in a footnote, sometimes it's not directly phrased the way it would be understandable per different project type, but a lot of this information is in there. So read it carefully. Really want to look to the evaluation and selection criteria to know what the department is looking for and how your project meets those goals. You really want to read these carefully, map out how your project addresses each criteria and support that with data or other information so we understand clearly what your project is and how it would be a wise investment of taxpayer dollars. The 3 primary areas where we've seen applications fall short is in the project narrative, the statement of work, and the benefit cost analysis. So FRA has to review hundreds of applications every round, and so the better ones stand out, by how clearly they fill these particular parts of the application with detail and it's supported by data. In terms of the project narrative, so we provide on this slide and in the notice of funding opportunity is the outline of the project narrative, your table of contents here. So we really want you to follow this form in your project narratives. There's 10 sections here. Your application must address each one of them in detail. The NOFO provides instructions on what each element is and what the expectations are for achieving them. So you want to include all elements here, and you want to structure your project so we can read it, we can understand it, and you must stick to the 25-page limit. This is important. You can include additional information in an appendix, such as engineering documents or letters of commitment or completed NEPA documents, whatever they may be. Those don't count against the page limit, but for the narrative itself, we really need you to stick to 25 pages. In terms of the cover page, we'll start early. So we've included a table in the NOFO, as is screenshotted here on the right. Please include this table at the beginning of your narrative. This is crucial for us to properly direct your application during the evaluation phase. So information we want on this table is obviously the applicant, the project title, project track. Again, the NOFO goes into detail about which track the projects by project type. Track 1 is planning. Again, that's corridor service development planning. Track 2 is preliminary engineering or NEPA. So any eligible project applying for funds to complete those phase should go through track 2. Track 3 is final design and construction. Again, you would sort of expect that NEPA would be complete or would be completed by the time of the award. And then track 4 is safety programs and institutes, research, workforce development. So those are the tracks of which these projects, as they come in, we direct them accordingly. So we really need you to know which track, identify which track you're applying to. We want to know if this application has been previously submitted for a federal grant, either to FRA or to another departmental grant program here at DOT. Is it a rural or non-rural project? We need to know that. We also, I think we have information on city, state, urbanized area or not. We have required set-asides in CRISI. So if you must indicate, whether you are seeking funds under one of these specific set-asides. Again, you have a rural set-aside, which is overall. Any type of project that meets that definition would be covered by that set-aside. There is the $75 million for intercity passenger rail development. So those are capital projects again. There's the $25 million for capital projects or trespass or engineering solutions for trespass prevention. And then there's also the 2 non-CRISI set-asides. One is for the law enforcement wages, enforcement activities, and the other is for the suicide prevention outreach campaign. So if you are seeking any of specific set-asides, you need to indicate that here on this in this cover page table. In terms of the sort of the project summary here. So this is your elevator pitch. It is a brief description, 4 to 6 sentences on what your project is, its anticipated benefits, and the transportation challenges the project will address. This needs to cut to the heart of the project without a lot of fluff. Again, your application will be competing with over 100 others at least if past its prologue, and your summary needs to be very clear on what the problem is, how you plan to fix it, and why that should matter to the department. Again, if you've got 30 seconds to pitch it to the department or folks in your community who you're seeking support for this project, how would you describe it? That's what we're looking for here. In terms of project funding, I want to indicate in table format the amount of federal funding requested, the proposed non-federal match, identify any contributions from the private sector if applicable, and the total project costs. We provide this example funding table in the notice of funding opportunity as well. You must describe any funding arrangements and attach funding commitment letters, again, as an appendix, but certainly reference these in your narrative in the appropriate section, but you don't need to worry about taking up space. Those can be included as an appendix in your application. If you're using in-kind contributions, please provide the description and estimated value and demonstrate how the in-kind contributions would be eligible under 2 CFR 200. If your project is rural or part of the project qualifies as rural, identify the percentage of the project costs that will be spent in a rural area. So again, this is where the project is occurring, not sort of the overall geographic area, but the exact area where the project is occurring. In terms of the detailed project description, so this is where we want you to expound on the purpose and need of the project. So thoroughly discuss the challenges and benefits and include the data to support those benefits. Photographs, diagrams, schematics, other visuals are very helpful in understanding the current layout of the infrastructure and how your project would improve that, where the problems are and how you're going to fix them. So remember that the folks that are reviewing your applications may not know your organization or your territory. They may not know much about you at all. And so visuals that sort of support your summary can go a long way to helping us understand your project. In the NOFO, there's specific guidance based on project types that you guys should be aware of if applicable to your project. For example, any project involving a highway rail grade crossing must include the DOT grade crossing inventory information. Again, CRISI projects must improve an existing crossing. If there's no crossing ID number, then your project, or at least that component of your project, would be ineligible. The example here that we see, again, would be a road, proposing to build a road over the rails where there is no current crossing. That would be an ineligible project under CRISI. For PTC projects, document the PTC implementation plan, how it will assist in the deployment, i.e. the installation and full implementation of a PTC system. Note that maintenance costs associated with PTC systems are not eligible under CRISI. For those seeking the non-CRISI trespass enforcement funds, please provide a detailed description of the proposed enforcement activities, including but not limited to data on trespass incidents and casualties, strategies to target hotspots identified by geospatial data, and expected reductions in trespass incidents stemming from enforcement activities. For those seeking non-CRISI suicide prevention outreach campaign fund to reduce suicide by railroad, applicants must provide a detailed description of the proposed outreach campaign, including, again, not just this, but relevant data on rail-related suicides in the project location, the manner and extent to which trespass suicide is expected to be reduced, and examples of prior efforts to address rail-related suicide. So again, in the notice, I find opportunity under the project description, detailed project descriptions, there is information by project type, I didn't list all of them, that you're going to want to follow and address directly. In terms of project location, so please include a map and geospatial data for the project. Identify the states, cities, counties where the project work will be done. It may span a broad area, which is fine, but we also want to know exactly where the work is being done. Congressional districts and rural area boundaries are important. Please make sure these are clearly marked on any kind of map that you submit. Important to have to identify railroad infrastructure locators such as railroad mileposts, grade crossing ID numbers, subdivisions, who owns what infrastructure. If the applicant is not the infrastructure owner, we want to know who is. If it's a grade crossing, we want to know who owns it, who else travels over it, what the traffic, the vehicle traffic is, or what have you. We want to know all this information about the project location so we get a better sense of what's going on. And please identify these in map and narrative form, so we know exactly where the work is being done. In terms of evaluation and selection criteria, so this is again really important as to how your project will be evaluated. It's not an open call here. The program has certain requirements that we have to look for. And so while a project may be good, the application needs to address these head on, or else it may not be as competitive as others that do. So include a thorough discussion of how the proposed project meets all the evaluation criteria and selection criteria. This is outlined in section E of the notice. Read section E several times so that you understand the criteria and how best to position your project to meet them. You must address each criteria. You can repeat information from earlier in your narrative. That's totally fine. But again, you must apply the relevant challenge and benefits appropriately. And quantify these benefits whenever possible. It's important that we have a sense of how folks are doing, and then and what we can expect to come out of the project if selected. Project implementation and management. This is important. So we want to highlight your experience managing similar projects, whether that's size or scope, and whether those included federal funding. It could be FRA or another DOT grant program, could be a different agency, but just a sense of if you have experience managing a project that includes federal funds and all the requirements there. Describe any arrangements already in place or expected to be in place should the project receive funding. These could include project contracting, contract oversight and control, risk management, conformance with federal requirements for progress reporting. We need to see that you have the proper structure in place to manage this project, so that you have the capacity to actually carry it out. Environmental readiness, we need you to document the environmental work that's either been initiated or completed. Obviously, if you're applying for PE NEPA, we want to know what has led to that, what work you have done in the planning stages to inform that decision. If it's a Track 3 project, again, final design construction, if NEPA is complete, great. We need to document that for us. If it is underway or it is not yet underway but expect to be complete, we just need to know the schedule and the time associated there. And again, just a little more clarity on sort of the planning piece. Is it was this project on a state or regional rail plan or another planning document? And again, for NEPA, NEPA can take a long time depending on the complexity of the project and what may have to occur. So we want to make sure you're very clear about the status of your project. Has it begun NEPA? Do what needs might need to be undertaken for further study? What you have already done to prep the project. So that is sort of a very important piece. We just need to know where exactly the project is in terms of environmental readiness. Moving on, so that was the project narrative. Moving on to the statement of work. So the statement of work is your scope, schedule, budget for the project. Another way to say this is the statement of work is what the taxpayer is buying. It's what we're buying. What are we buying? How much? How long will it take? So the statement of work must contain sufficient detail so that FRA can understand the expected outcomes of the proposed work that's being performed, and we can monitor progress toward completing the project tasks and deliverables during the period of performance. So when preparing the budget, the total cost of a project must be based on the best available information as indicated in the references that include engineering studies, economic feasibility, environmental analysis, and other information on the expected use of equipment facilities. We have some guidance here on our website, if helpful. This might be a good exercise for some applicants to go through in terms of sort of coming up with a cost estimating for their project. Make sure you're consistent on the cost throughout the whole application. Sometimes numbers are combined in a table, whereas sometimes they're broken out into very much detail. We just want to make sure that stuff is clear throughout your whole application. In terms of the statement of work sort of itself, there's four main sort of templates here, but make sure to organize the statement of work into discrete and logical tasks. If there are multiple components to the project, we need to know how these would be ordered, and if one is dependent on another in terms of timing. We need to see the specific tasks and subtasks, broken down clearly. We need to understand how all the components work together to achieve the expected outcome. And we really want to make sure, again, and we say this a couple times because we get applications with different numbers, make sure that the budget numbers are consistent, make sure the schedule is consistent, make sure the matching, each partner's match is consistent throughout the application. We provide a templates here on our website for this different statement of work documents here. They're screenshotted as well. These are the other three, I believe. So we provide these, so you must use these to be considered for the award. And these are FRA's standard statement of work, schedule, budget, and performance measurement templates. The more detailed and logically ordered a statement of work is at application, the faster we can negotiate a grant agreement if you are selected. This saves a lot of time and energy on your end, as with FRA staff. So the more detail, the more prepared, the more ready statements of work are, that generally makes a more competitive application. Applications with minimal details in the statement of work are generally not competitive. And I will hand it off to Mary for another poll.
All right, fantastic. Our next question is, do you have experience preparing a benefit cost analysis? Yes, extensive. Yes, limited. No experience. And again, all you need to do is select the little circle next to the answer and the system will automatically record it. All right, thank you all so much. It looks like we've got 10% have extensive experience, 48% have limited, and 43% have no experience. And I believe we're going to Judah next.
Yep, that's correct. Thank you, Mary. My name is Judah Lynham. I'm located within FRA's Office of Railroad Policy and Development, and I'll be discussing BCA best practices with you today. Wanted to give you an overview of the steps, but first take a step back and talk about the different project tracks. Tracks 2 and 3 should be thorough, similar to BCA's for other US DOT programs, such as Build and Infra. You want to use the guidance provided by the department and remember to document inputs for traffic, ridership, and your assumptions on growth. Tracks 1 and 4 can be more qualitative, but keep in mind that you want to be competitive. Track 1 corridor planning projects have typically been successful with their BCAs by basing their BCA on the completed corridor, even if the exact total costs are not known yet. Use the estimations you have available to you and document the assumptions. Track 4 is typically where we have seen more subjective or qualitative BCA submissions, but it is entirely possible to quantify these types of projects, and you want to be competitive as possible. 2019 is the base year that we'll be looking at for these submissions. For the scope of the analysis, it's important to understand the difference between the base case and the alternate case. The base case is the world without your project. It's not alternatives to the current situation. You're applying to do something, not applying to maybe do a few different things. Please be confident in your project and its benefits. And I want to emphasize the importance of presenting a single project and quantifying benefits and costs as individual elements as you're able to do so. For example, if your project seeks to rehab several bridges or grade crossings along a corridor, please provide separate costs and benefits for each of these to the extent possible. It is typical for some elements to be more cost beneficial than others. There is no reason to be concerned with presenting the results as they actually are. We expect to see analysis periods between 20 to 30 years typically, and you can capture residual value beyond that point. Please do not extend your analysis for track 2 or 3 to the entire corridor, as you would with the track 1 planning, or analyze alternatives, as I've said before. Present a single project direction and stick to the project elements that you're applying to build or upgrade, etc. Also, use localized information wherever possible versus national level estimates. Please present the marginal benefits of your project. Identify and quantify all costs, even operations and maintenance costs in the base case. Along with quantifying the typical benefits such as safety, operations and maintenance, and increased efficiency, please consider quantifying or discussing benefits that align with the administration's priorities within your BCA. For example, racial equity and economic inclusion, resiliency and equitable environmental impacts, and impacts to underserved communities and/or areas of persistent poverty. Speaking in terms of development, break down the effects into the smallest sub-elements possible. As I've said before, provide the documentation for inputs and growth rates. Use DOT data and models. For example, successful project applications typically apply FRA safety data and models. We like to see you using those data sources. They work well, and it is data that we are comfortable with. Modal diversion. Benefits that accrue from new or induced users in a modal diversion scenario are to be accounted for at 50% per US DOT guidance. This is typically an issue we see applicants struggle with for passenger rail improvement related projects, capacity enhancements, and new construction such as transload, etc. On the other hand, benefits to existing users are to be accounted for at 100%. The USDOT BCA guidance that's available, it's your friend. Please read it in its entirety. Take advantage of it. As a recap, your BCA will be more competitive if you follow the guidance provided to you and provide a concise analysis that includes documentation of assumptions and inputs. And please provide your BCA model in an unlocked spreadsheet form so the FRA can review and make corrections or adjustments as needed. As I mentioned before, BCA guidance is available to applicants. Please take advantage of it. While it's not a template, which I saw several questions in the chat pod there, it shouldn't be a template. Each project is individual and will have individual benefits and costs associated with it. It is sufficient guidance to assist you with developing your BCA. Take the time to read both documents before you begin. I mean, we know your project likely has great benefits, and it's simply a matter of quantifying them correctly and presenting them logically and concisely to the FRA in your application.
So in terms of environmental readiness, NEPA is required of all FRA grant funded projects to document substantiate our agency's decision. So with your application, you want to submit that approved NEPA document. If it's available, it could also come from another mode, another federal agency, I believe. But whatever has been done and completed, please submit that documentation with your application. If you don't have any previous documentation, you're encouraged to consider the following in the grant application to the best of your knowledge: the known project location, possible impacts to either historic, protected populations, noise and vibration, or the natural environments of wetlands, air, species, habitat, floodplains, as well as anticipated permitting needs, construction, Clean Water Act, Section 404, or any kind of coordination or consultation that would have to happen to get your project to construction. That could be a state historic preservation office, for example. And we can, we have a lot of experience, expertise determining the type of NEPA and level of documentation and coordination for your project. So you can contact our experts. We have an email here that goes to the whole group. We have some helpful information on FRA's website, which is on NEPA documentation, previous recommended trainings for environmental resources. And we're also having a NEPA webinar at the end of October. That's maybe not the best time for this, but that'd give you at least with the November 29th deadline here, that would give an opportunity for folks who still have some maybe outstanding questions to attend that. But again, we have some contact information here. In terms of recaps and reminders, again, it sounds silly, but always read the NOFO carefully, read it twice, and then read it again. We provide templates to follow. Use them as a checklist to ensure that you're addressing each element of the application in full. Specifically, look at the evaluation and selection criteria and address them head on. Don't bury key points. This sounds obvious, but we have seen applications that spend too much time discussing a larger, perhaps secondary or tertiary benefit of the project rather than the exact project the taxpayer is purchasing from you. So don't get lost in the clouds. Present your project as it fits the CRISI program criteria and support it with relevant data. The other sort of big hint recap here is just to proofread. Make sure that every budget table matches the figures and the rest of the application. Same with the schedule. Identify all project partners, indicate any in-place agreements, and include letters of support with your application. Only include project costs expected to be incurred after grant selection. Again, anything that you plan to expend beforehand or that has already been expended will not be eligible as part of your project. So do not include those. Having a cold reader review your application is helpful. You will have numerous cold readers review them here at FRA. And so what may be obvious to you or someone knowledgeable about your organization, your operations, your geography, or a particular situation that you're trying to solve here, that needs to be clearly articulated in the application. So it's always helpful to have someone else review that application so it's clear and not so in the weeds as to be sort of confusing for some reviewers who may not be familiar with what you're trying to do. In terms of timelines, I just want to give you sort of a sense of where we are. Again, the application deadline is November 29th, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Very unlikely that will get extended. As Matthew said earlier, that is the Monday after Thanksgiving. We typically see people try to apply on the last day. It rarely works out. There can be technical difficulties. There may not, in terms of when this deadline is falling, there may not be assistance of the technical nature, whether that's grants.gov or anyone here at FRA. Highly, highly, highly encourage you to get that in before you go on Thanksgiving break. You can enjoy it more, watch football, eat turkey. There won't be anybody really to help you once it really gets to that sort of Thursday, obviously not Thursday, but certainly that Friday and Monday and over the weekend. It would be a real scramble. Get the project in well before the deadline. If you are fortunate to be selected for an award, congratulations, but that's just the beginning. The general timeline for obligating a grant agreement can take anywhere from 6 to 15 months. This time can be accelerated if the information included in your application, specifically detailed statements of work, laying out the scope, schedule, budget, and performance measures, which will be required to report on if you're selected, as well as any NEPA needs and status. We want to make sure that those are sufficiently advanced in the application, so it's not a serious amount of work from selection, again, if lucky, to getting the actual grant agreement signed. During obligation, this is the period performance of the grant. These will depend on the specific project. I've seen some questions come in about that. There is really no limit on the period of performance or no statutory limit on that for the CRISI program. But again, project readiness is a criteria that we evaluate projects on. More complex projects will take longer. We understand that. So usually about 2 to 5 years. Specifically for the the non-CRISI trespass enforcement activities, for the law enforcement wages, those period of performance is 12 months. So that is required. But for everyone else, really it's project by project. Again, as Judith said, every project is unique. We have as much guidance as we can, but we'll work with you in terms of shaping the actual grant agreement, statement of work, and performance measures to fit your project. But again, the more work you do on the front end in your application, the easier it is for us to get there. During obligation, you'll be required to provide progress reports, meet with FRA, be subject to monitoring and oversight, invoice reviews, and then after closeout, which is great after the project is complete, you still be required to provide documentation relative to the outcomes and benefits of the project. So that is sort of the big picture here. If your project is an urgent need that needs to happen soon, again, we expect awards sometime in the spring of 2022, and then you have to get to obligation before you'll be able to expend any dollars if you are selected. So keep that in mind. If your project is a real near-term need, as in calendar year 2020, 21, excuse me, or early 22, this might not be the best opportunity for you. And we will work with you if selected to sort of shape the period of performance. But just for a sense of timing for everyone, I know everyone's excited here, but in terms of timing, again, spring 2022 is when we'd likely announce the awards, and then there's some time after that to get to obligation when you can actually begin the project.
Thank you all so much for joining us today for the fiscal year 2021 CRISI NOFO webinar. This webinar will be posted to FRA's website in about a week. The presentation slides will be posted tomorrow, and the actual video from today's recording will be posted on the 28th of September, which is next Tuesday. This webinar is going to end in about 10 seconds, so if you want to copy down the contact information you see on the screen, please do so now. Please note that all web links will also be emailed to you at the conclusion of this webinar today. We appreciate everyone's attendance, and we hope you all have a great day. Thanks for joining us, and the webinar is now ended.